Hey everybody, it's Tyler Austin. Thank you so much for watching. So today we're going to discuss proper squat form. What does proper squat form entail? What does it look like? Etc. etc. There's a lot of bickering on the internet on what constitutes good, correct squat form. A lot of it's over stupid, nuanced things that really, at the end of the day, do not matter. Things like whether or not you should wrap your thumbs around the bar or keep them on top of the bar, exact stance width, eye gaze position, etc., etc. And these things ultimately do not really matter. However, there are critical points that make up a good, correct squat. These are things like depth, balance, knee position, hip position, torso position, and so on. These are what we're going to talk about today. There are correct ways of doing the squat in terms of these critical points, and these things ultimately do matter. So let's go ahead and take a look at some of the best lifters in the world and some of just average lifters as well. All of them are going to be my clients. And we're going to take a look at what constitutes good, correct form, and we're going to break this down from bottom to top. So here's Kirk Kowalski. This is him squatting 600 for 8 in training. So let's go ahead. Again, he's arguably the best squatter to ever walk the earth. So let's go ahead and take a look at this. I'm going to try to pause this at the very bottom. Boom. Okay, so here's his bottom position. So again, let's go ahead and break this down from bottom to top. All right, now that I have my marker, let's talk about depth. So we need to squat what is called below parallel. And what this means is that the top of your hip, it's going to be kind of hard to see in this image here simply because it's kind of a frontal view, but his hip joint's going to be roughly there. So the top of your hip joint dips below the top of your knee in the very bottom of the squat. So that is known as a below parallel squat, and it is very critical for not only the effectiveness of the exercise, but also for an objective means of measuring a complete rep. Full range of motion, full below parallel squats are not only effective squats because they train the muscle mass and a much longer range of motion, and therefore just makes it a more effective strengthening exercise. But it also provides an objective means of measuring a complete rep because it's an objective way of measuring it. Did the top of your hips dip below the top of your knee? If they did, it was a complete rep, assuming that you were able to actually squat it up out of the hole. It was a complete rep. If it didn't, if your hips did not dip below your knees, then it was a partial rep, an incomplete rep. It's very objective. Now, if you allow yourself to squat high, there is no objective means of measuring what constitutes a complete rep versus an incomplete rep. What constitutes a quarter squat versus a half squat? Well, there's no real good objective way of measuring that. So there's no good objective way of measuring a complete rep versus an incomplete rep. And that is also a very critical point on why we squat below parallel, because it gives us a good objective means of measuring complete reps versus incomplete reps, along with making the exercise significantly more effective for strengthening and building muscle mass. So again, we need to squat below parallel, meaning our hips, the top of our hip joint dips below the top of our knee, and be aware that the top of the hip joint is not the top of the thighs, particularly with really big, strong men like Kirk who have really big thighs. The top of the hip is not the top of the thighs, it's the top of the hip joint, okay? So just be aware of that. All right, so I just erased all those marks. So let's now move on to balance. Balance is super critical because obviously you are able to lift more weight more effectively and safely when you are in balance than rather being out of balance. And what I mean by balance is your weight distribution over your foot. So your balance point is going to be over the middle of your foot, which is roughly right there. An easy way to kind of put a marker on this is your middle of your foot is basically where you tie the knot in your shoes. That will be roughly the middle of your foot, and that is your balance point. So that's where the weight, that's where your weight needs to be concentrated. It should not feel like the weight is focused on the balls of your feet or on your toes, and it should not feel like the weight is on your heels either. If the weight is on your toes, means you're off balance forward. If the weight is on your heels, that means you are off balance backwards. Neither are good. It should feel like when you are balanced over the middle of your foot, it will feel like the weight is evenly distributed over your entire foot. So it doesn't feel like there's any. It doesn't feel like the majority of the weight is in one portion of the foot or the other. It feels evenly distributed over the entire foot. Again, this is very important because if you are in balance, it means that you are able to more effectively, safely, and efficiently lift the weight, which is obviously important. It's just common sense. Can you lift more weight? Can you push harder when you are imbalanced rather than off balance? It's just common sense. All right, got rid of those marks. So now let's talk about shin and knee position. So in the bottom of the squat, your shin should be relatively vertical. They'll always have a slight forward lean to them, if you will. But your shin should be relatively vertical, and your knees should be stacked up over your feet. So your knees should never cross past your toes. Shin should be relatively vertical, knees stacked up over your feet. And the reason why this is important is because the more forward your knees are in the bottom position, the more leverage that is acting on your knees, and therefore the more leverage your knees have to overcome to squat out of the bottom of the squat. So we don't want more leverage on the knees. We want a little bit less leverage on the knees. So our knees need to be back, stacked up over our feet, and the shins need to be relatively vertical. Now, how far forward or how far back you can keep your knees is going to depend quite a bit based on your anthropometry and on the type of squat you are doing. Somebody with really long legs, really long femurs in particular, is not going to be able to keep their knees as far back as somebody who is really built to squat like Kirk here, who has short legs and short femurs in particular. However, no matter the type of squat you are doing or your specific anthropometry, your knees should never cross over your toes. Your knees should stay stacked up somewhere over your feet. The different types of squat as well, like in the low bar squat, you're going to be able to keep your knees as far back as you can because it allows you to shove your hips back. In the low bar squat, you're able to shove your hips back as far as you can. High bar squat, your knees will go just a little bit more forward, and in the front squat, your knees will be a little bit more forward because you're not able to shove your hips as far back. But no matter what, again, no matter what type of squat you're doing or your anthropometry, your knees should never cross over your toes. Again, it's because we don't want all that leverage on the knees. The more vertical our shins are, and the more stacked up our knees are over, the more stacked up the knees are over the ankles, the less leverage the knees have to deal with in the bottom of the squat, which is exactly what we want. All right, and now moving on to hip position. So this is going to depend a little bit on, quite a bit on the type of squat you are doing, but the back angle in particular is greatly dependent on the hips. It's actually directly dependent on the hips. We're going to talk about the back angle here next, but the hips are shoved back and down in the squat. So they are shoved back and down. Now how far back you shove your hips is going to depend again on the type of squat you're doing. The low bar squat, which is what Kirk is doing here, you're able to shove your you're able to shove your hips real far back because again, it's going to be dependent on the back angle, which I'll talk about here in a second. But you're able to shove your hips really far back in the low bar squat. High bar squat, you're able to shove your hips pretty far back, but not as far back. And in the front squat, you're not really able to shove your hips back very far. Again, I'll talk about why here when we talk about the back angle. But again, you shove your hips back and down. A big mistake people make in the squat is that they basically just break at the knees and they try to drop their hips straight down. And that is not what you want to do, because what's going to happen is that's going to force your knees way forward. It's going to shove your knees way forward over your toes, and it's going to put a whole lot of leverage on those knees, and that's a whole lot of leverage the knees have to overcome in the bottom of the squat, which again, like I discussed before, is not what you want. So you need to shove your hips back and down. It's as if you're trying to sit back in a chair. You're shoving your hips back and down, not just straight down, back and down. All right. Now we're going to talk about back angle. And back angle is directly related to how far you shove your hips back. The back angle is dictated by the hips, not by the back itself. So you do not manipulate the back angle by folding the back over. The back angle is directly related to how far you shove your hips back. And the reason why the back angle changes throughout the squat is because of balance. The bar in a heavy squat is basically the center of mass of the barbell lifter system, i.e. you and the barbell on your back. When the bar is heavy, that barbell is basically the center of mass. So, for example, this is 600 pounds, and Kirk, in this video, I would assume probably weighs 275. That bar is significantly heavier than him. So this bar is the center of mass of the barbell lifter system, which again is just you with the barbell on your back. So this bar, in order to be in balance, needs to be over the middle of your foot. And depending on where you place the bar on your body, this is going to dictate the kind of back angle you need to obtain in order to get this bar over the middle of the foot. So in the low bar squat, which is what he's doing, that bar is on the lowest position on his back that he can securely hold it. So in order to get this bar over the middle of his foot, he needs to shove his hips real far back, and which is going to get his back angle a little bit more horizontal than it would be in like a high bar or a front squat, because again, that bar is real low on his back. So he's going to have to shove his hips real far back. His back angle is going to get a little bit more horizontal in order to get this bar over the middle of his foot, which again is the balance point, is your balance point. So that's why we need to get the bar over the middle of the foot. In the high bar squat, the bar is a little bit higher up on your back, basically on top of your traps. So you do not have to shove your hips as far back in order to get that bar over the middle of the foot. If it was a front squat, the bar is sitting on top of your shoulders in front of you, so you really do not have to get your hips back at all. In fact, you're going to stay relatively vertical in your back angle. So that's why the hips drop almost vertically down, and that's why the knees travel a little bit farther forward in the front squat. Again, like I said before, the knees should never cross over your toes, no matter what kind of squat you are doing. But in the front squat, the knees will go more forward than they will be in like a low bar squat, because you're not able to shove your hips as far back in the front squat as you are in like the low bar squat, and therefore your torso is going to be a little bit more vertical. So that is the back angle. Again, the back is not manipulated via flexion in the back. The back is kept up and tight and erect, as well as the chest. The chest is up and erect, and the back is more or less nothing more than like an I-beam. It does not move. It's just a stiff piece of metal, and which connects your hips to the bar, and it does not move at all. The back angle is directly manipulated via the hips and how far you shove them back, not by bending of the back. Okay, so with that being said, let's actually go ahead and take a look at these squats in real time, and let's see what these look like. So again, as he breaks his knees, he shoves those hips back and down to obtain that back angle. He is not folding over at the back. He's shoving his hips back in order to obtain that back angle, keeping his knees. He's keeping those knees stacked up over those feet. Shin's relatively vertical, and he's reaching his depth. He's going below parallel every single rep. And these are what good squats look like. All right, let's go ahead and take a look at another great. This is Ed Cohn, arguably the best squatter, or arguably the best power lifter to ever walk the earth. So once again, you're going to see the exact same thing. Let me go ahead and go back and pause at the bottom. Obviously, well below parallel, you can see how horizontal he is in this bottom position because he has a different build than Kirk that we just watched. He's a little bit more long-legged, short torso, so he's going to be a little bit more bent over in the squat than Kirk. But again, you see the same exact things. Shins are relatively vertical, knees are back and stacked up over the feet, hips are back, chest is up, and back is up and tight and erect, and hips are back, bars over the middle of the foot. He's perfectly in balance here, which you have to be when you're squatting this much weight. I believe this is I want to say this is around 800 pounds. So yeah, you see the same exact things as you did in the other squat that we just talked about. All right, so here's Ed Cohn squatting again. Here's just a different angle. Again, well below parallel there. He shoved his hips back, obtained his back angle, kept his knees back, knees vertical. Shins vertical, knees stacked up over his feet. And again, you saw the exact same thing. All right, so now let's take a look at, just some normal people, not, super high level power lifters squatting. Let's take a look at some normal people. And again, the two people we're going to look at here, these are both my clients. But again, you're going to watch and witness the same exact type of form. He takes a pretty wide stance. He likes a pretty wide stance. But you can see just how vertical he keeps his shins. Knees, again, stacked up over his feet. Chest is up and tight. Back is up and tight. And he obtains his back angle by shoving his hips back. All right, and finally, one more video. Here's another one of my clients. He's high bar squatting here, but again, you're going to see the same exact thing. Shins relatively vertical, in balance, knees stacked up over his feet. Chest is up, and back is up and erect. It's the same exact form. Well, I hope you found this video helpful and informative. Please like, subscribe, follow depending on where you're watching this. If you'd like help with your squat form, I offer online coaching. So if that's something you'd be interested in, be sure to send me an email via the email down in the description below, and I'd be more than happy to help you. Again, I'm Tyler Austin. Thank you so much for watching.